call Woodruff for all this because we sure need it right now.
Another token of our appreciation. So, Semper Fi, brother. Thank you. We'll see you next month.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kelly Finn-Stormer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Combined Arms Institute, where we aim to serve organizations across the nation to help them elevate the impact they're having on veterans and military families. So thank you for taking a minute to join us today, as we're here to talk about an important issue, veteran food insecurity. We're going to talk more about the problem, available support, and resources for you so that you can more effectively serve this community. We're so grateful to our partners at MAZON, at the Bob Woodruff Foundation, Operation Stand Down Tennessee, and all of those who've helped to share and talk about this issue and really highlight the services to veterans and their families. You'll hear us say it time and time again, it's a collaborative effort and we can't do this work without your support. We wanted to start with a little highlight video, and apologies for the black bar across that screen. Hopefully y'all were able to get the effects from that. We'll talk more about the work that we're seeing at Combined Arms as well. If you go to the next slide, please. We want to just make sure that we're going to lean more into the challenges that the veteran population are having. We're going to talk about available programs and resources, including an overview of SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We'll talk more about veteran populations that are greater at risk for food insecurity and how that connects to suicide, diet, health conditions, and overall wellness, as well as try to provide you with some insight into innovative partnerships that can help you more effectively serve this community. Just for everyone's awareness, I'm just going to be serving as your host and moderator today. We will be having a question and answer today section at the end of the panel. And we will always make the slides and resources as well as the recording available, as I know everybody loves to ask that question. So thank you for your patience. We're looking forward to jumping into the content here as well. If you'll go to the next slide, please. We are hosting this as a satellite event. September is Hunger Action Month. And so thank you all for joining us and for taking that first step into learning more how you can take action to solve hunger. This is a satellite event with the White House Conference of Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, which is going to be taking place later this month on September 28th. And there are lots more satellite events that are taking place that you can participate in and learn more as we serve this community. But if you do have highlights and information that you've learned or you'd like to share with others, we'd love for you to tag us. You can see all of our partner organization handles here, as well as using the hashtag White House or WH Conference Hunger Health. It's kind of a long one, but also hashtag Hunger Action Month. We are available on all the social media channels as well as our partners. So thank you again for joining us. So a little bit about Combined Arms. Our organization streamlines the connections for veterans and families and service members back to the communities where they are living. We do this in collaboration and in partnership with 230 vetted partner organizations that are delivering best-in-class services to meet the needs of the community on the ground. We also use this through a technology tool that enables us to get real-time data insights onto the needs of veterans and military families. And what we've seen in 2022 is a staggering increase in requests for food assistance from this community. There's additional research that we'll be sharing more about some of the challenges. We've also seen insignificant requests for financial assistance. We know that those factors with COVID-related resources deactivating, as well as inflation rates, inflated costs of groceries, and fuel have been really causing a lot of challenges for the military-connected community. And people have to make the decision as to whether they're going to pay their rent, buy groceries, or fill up their tanks. And quite honestly, we need to figure out how we can better support holistically this community. So we are striving to connect each military veteran and their family member to those resources. We have over more than 1,000 resources of support through the Combined Arms Network that we can connect you to regardless of where you live, 45 of which are those national partners that can help connect you regardless of whether you're in Texas or South Carolina or anywhere else where we have expansion partnerships. But emerging evidence has suggested that veteran food insecurity is associated with increased depression symptoms and suicidal ideation, which is of course very concerning for our community. We want to make sure that we're addressing this quickly and efficiently. And so we look forward to sharing more with you about this today so that we can make sure that we're taking care of those who've served our nation. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Our amazing partners at the Woodruff Foundation, we express a great thanks to them for identifying this need and really helping to fund a lot of this work in the communities across the nation in partnership, and to a great supporter of Craig Newmark and Craig Newmark Philanthropies. If you all want to tweet him as well, he's a great advocate for the military connected community, and we're grateful to him and the Woodruff Foundation for their support. In their recent report, quantifying and addressing needs for veterans, they have reported that 67% of Bob Woodruff Foundation's community partners reported many or almost all of their veteran clients have requested food or nutrition assistance. But 72% of those communities were not seeing any food-related needs, and they couldn't satisfy them fully. So we are here to figure out how we can arm you with better and more information so that you can effectively meet the needs of those that you're serving. And we are grateful for you, again, for taking the time to join us today. If you all want to take a minute and share a little bit in the chat about where you're coming from, what organization you're with, we'd love to make this as interactive as possible as well. But I want to take, if you go to the next slide, please. Take a minute. We have an incredible panel lined up for you of experts that's going to share more about their work. We have Josh Protas, who's going to be joining me here shortly. Laura Griffin, I didn't change the slide, but we do have a pinch hitter, Jackie O'Connor, joining us from the Food and Nutrition Service. We're so grateful to her. Dr. Nipa Kamdar, Michael Adamson from Operation Stand Down Tennessee, and John Smith, who's going to be the Combined Arms Southeast Regional Manager. So without further ado, I will turn it on over to Josh. If you'll join me, please. Josh is if you go to the next slide, he's the VP of Public Policy at MAZON, and he's been there since 2012. And he coordinates and implements MAZON's advocacy agenda, including efforts to protect and strengthen the federal nutrition safety net, with particular emphasis on food security needs for seniors, veterans, and military families. He has extensive experience working at Jewish communal agencies at both the local and national level. And we're just so grateful for him, for his insight and his partnership to be able to share with us today. So over to you, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you to Combined Arms and to the other amazing partners who've made this webinar possible, and to the other presenters. This is really such an important topic that has been getting more attention, and we're glad to be able to share information to help all of you be better equipped to deal with food insecurity among the veterans that you work with. As Kelly mentioned, this is a satellite event in conjunction with the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. And while this webinar is aimed at VSOs and providers who support veterans, I just want to note that there's much more that the VA, Congress, and the administration can and should do to address the crisis of veteran food insecurity. And I'll say it a couple of times, this really is a crisis, and it's a preventable crisis. There's no reason that those who serve in our armed forces should ever have to struggle to put food on the table. And yet, unfortunately, as we'll hear more in detail later, millions of our veterans do struggle needlessly because there are supports, there are programs that can help. And our hope is that through this webinar, we'll equip you to better make those connections so that veterans don't struggle with hunger. MAZON, a Jewish response to hunger, is inspired by Jewish values and ideals. We're a national organization fighting to end hunger among people of all faiths and backgrounds in the United States and Israel. For more than 37 years, MAZON has been committed to ensuring vulnerable populations have access to the resources they need to put food on the table. We're a leading voice in the anti-hunger field, developing strategic initiative focused on communities that are at particular risk of hunger and have often been overlooked. And as Kelly mentioned, in addition to our work around veteran food insecurity, we've been leading efforts to address food insecurity among active duty military families. We're also doing work in Indian country, addressing the needs of single mothers in Puerto Rico, and then also for LGBTQ older adults. And obviously there's some overlap with some of these different special populations. Our work starts with the understanding that we'll never food bank our way to an end of hunger. And that's really important. I know for Combined Arms and many of the VSOs and partner groups that are on the call today, there's a lot of work that's done to meet the immediate needs for veterans who are struggling. And what I want to suggest to all of you is that we need a both and approach. That yes, we need to meet the immediate needs by providing emergency food assistance, and we need to make sure that our safety net programs fully reach those who are in need and have the capacity to adequately meet those needs. So I won't talk at length about the advocacy that's associated with this, but do want to just note that there's a lot of work to be done to protect and strengthen programs like SNAP. The next slide. So SNAP, and we'll hear much more from an expert at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service about specifics around the SNAP program, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's really the foundation of our federal nutrition safety net, and is such a critical resource for veterans and for all people who struggle with food insecurity. And of significant concern is an extremely low participation rate among the veteran population for SNAP. So a recent study done by Impact International indicated that among food insecure veterans, less than 1/3 were in households receiving SNAP. And that among veterans in households whose incomes were below the poverty threshold, only about 4 in 10 were in SNAP recipient households. So this is important because SNAP is a mandatory federal program. That means anybody who is eligible for the program can receive those benefits. They're not taking the benefits away from somebody else who they may think needs it more. If you qualify for SNAP, you can receive those benefits. And according to the research done by Impact International, almost 6 in 10 veterans who were potentially eligible for SNAP and struggling with food insecurity were not receiving the benefits. So they're literally leaving that food on the table. And closing that SNAP participation gap is a huge opportunity and need to better address the crisis of veteran food insecurity. Next slide, please. So possibly you heard about this webinar through some information that you've seen online, and the issue of veteran food insecurity has been getting a lot more public attention, certainly in the course of the pandemic, and with inflationary pressures, we've seen a lot more about hunger in general and about increased needs in our communities. But the issue of veteran food insecurity has also been getting more attention, and we'll hear from some of our experts later about what those impacts look like. Kelly mentioned the linkage between food insecurity and suicide rates, and certainly for military families and for veterans, there's been a lot of concern about reducing the challenges that can lead, unfortunately, to suicide. And addressing food insecurity is an important part of that effort. We've also seen how veterans have been suffering with food insecurity and understanding the personal dimensions of that. Next slide, please. So I want to just personalize the issue, because oftentimes when we talk about food insecurity and you hear information about it, there are a lot of statistics that get shared, and sometimes some stereotypes or misinformation about what food insecurity is and what it looks like at a personal level. So MAZON worked with a photojournalist who traveled around the country to collect stories of real people who have struggled with food insecurity. And Joe and his family, who live in Montana, have a story that's really important, and I think helps exemplify why addressing food insecurity is so important. Joe was age 45 when we crossed paths with him. He's a disabled veteran living in Bozeman, Montana with his wife and 2 children. Joe joined the military in 1988 because he otherwise would not have been able to afford to pay for college. He was forcibly discharged from the Navy in 1998 after being diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And then a friend informed him how he might be eligible for benefits through the VA and encouraged him to apply. It took Joe 2 long years to be assigned only a 10% disability rating. Then later in 2004, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and again chose to go through the arduous VA application process. However, without anyone to help him, he was denied any medical benefits. Joe shared with us, even though the VA knew about our financial problems and my medical needs, no one ever mentioned any other options for assistance like SNAP or WIC. We didn't even know they existed. Fast forward to later in his life, when Joe moved to Montana, he decided to try again for a higher disability rating through the VA. And this time with the help of a VA counselor, he eventually was assigned 100% disability rating. And because of a friend at a VSO who recommended that Joe apply for SNAP benefits, he qualified and started getting very helpful assistance that not only help put food on the table, but put healthy food on the table. Joe indicated, eating better has really changed my life. I used to be on about 8 medications when we moved here. And now, because of the quality of food we are eating, it is much better, more leafy greens and fruits and almost no processed foods. I'm now only taking 2 pills and I'm actually managing my MS better than I was before when I got off all of those medications for multiple sclerosis. Because Joe's quality of life finally improved, he hopes that others won't be so discouraged and that they don't give up before they make it through the paperwork. Joe said, I want people who are going through financial difficulties to know that there's hope, that the resources are out there and that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But you can't just sit there, you have to go out and seek help. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it needs to be a shorter road to get to that light. Next slide, please. So one of the things that MAZON has done, and want to share this as a resource, there'll be a link available in the slides later, is a short training course on food insecurity that we did in conjunction with Psych Armor Institute. And you'll see on the title slide here, Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's been a huge champion for food insecurity issues for active duty military families and veterans. She herself experienced food insecurity growing up in a veteran household when her father was laid off. And she shares that personal story as part of this short course that might be a helpful resource to be able to share with others who you know who work with veterans, just to help familiarize them with what food insecurity is, what that looks like in the veteran population, and helpful connections to programs like SNAP. Next slide, please. So here's my contact information. I'm happy to be a resource for any of you. My work in particular focuses on the advocacy and in working with Congress and federal agencies to strengthen and improve federal nutrition programs. We're doing a lot of work with the VA and with USDA. And you'll be hearing a lot more information from the other panelists about SNAP and other ways that you can help make sure that we're really taking that both and approach to ending veteran hunger. We're meeting the immediate needs now, and we're also building in place strong systems and programs that can fully meet the needs for veterans who are struggling. So Kelly, I'm happy to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Josh. And it's such an important work that you all are doing at MAZON. As you shared, right, we all have an action to take here. One is to remove the stigma and to help take an action for this preventable crisis for veterans and families. So we'll continue to post those resources in the chat. One of the other things that Josh, while his email address is up here as providers, if you have people that are willing to share their stories, much like Joe, please do contact Josh, as he spends an important part of his work and time advocating on the Hill. And as you might imagine, how this humanizes it for our legislators. So I'll make that ask on his behalf. Next slide, if we'll, again, I want to take this minute to introduce Jackie O'Connor, who is the management analyst from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, United States Department of Agriculture, from the Food and Nutrition Service. And again, she's joining us as a pinch hitter today. So thank you so much, Jackie. If you'd like, we'll turn it over to you to give us an overview.
Great, thank you so much. As Kelly said, my name is Jackie O'Connor. I'm a management analyst within SNAP at the Food and Nutrition Service. I'm filling in for Laura Griffin today, so I'm going to apologize if I stumble on things. I've been with SNAP for a little over 6 years now. I've worked in both retailer policy on who can be authorized as a SNAP retailer. And then most recently, I've been on our certification side, so dealing with SNAP households and their process on and journey on applying and receiving benefits. Next slide. There we go. So today I'm going to be giving an overview of the eligibility process for SNAP. The application process can be daunting and confusing for people, especially if they're also experiencing another hardship at the same time. So kind of what I hope you can get out of this explanation is just a better understanding of the process and where organizations like yourself may be able to provide support for veterans and their families if and when if they need this type of program. And we'll talk a little bit about some resources available as well. Next slide. So our mission, the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008, it's the main statute that governs SNAP. The mission of it is to provide improved levels of nutrition among low-income households. It's a cooperative federal state program to be operated through normal channels of trade, and then also to increase food purchasing power for households, which is one of the main reasons why this program was originally put under USDA. So a little bit of trivia there. Next slide. So what does that actually mean though? So SNAP, as I feel like a lot of people do know, this program, it fights hunger and it tries to help improve nutrition, especially among low-income households. States administer SNAP, while the federal government provides over the rules and the oversight for the program. Eligibility, the nuts and bolts, is determined only at state and local offices. Eligible households then will receive their benefits on an EBT card that they can use to purchase food at authorized retailers. This card is very similar to kind of a debit card with a PIN. People do have to make the choice to apply for themselves, while someone, others can help someone apply and kind of act in their stead as an authorized representative. The individual or the household has to kind of make that decision that they want to apply for this program and want this help. Next slide. So this slide kind of shows how SNAP is structured. Down at the bottom, the USDA Food and Nutrition Service, through the Food and Nutrition Act and our various regulations, set eligibility guidelines and rules. FNS, we pay 100% of the benefit amount and then 50% of the administrative costs that state incurs to administer the program. FNS authorizes retailers and provides oversight to state agencies. And then state agencies are actually the ones administering the program. They oversee their various systems, their EBT system, their financial management. States administer nutrition education programs, employment and training programs. Where there are tribes, state agencies will work with and consult with tribes. County and local offices are where kind of like the true action happens. Households will kind of go to, or they can call, maybe sometimes even email their state or their local or county office. And that is where applications are processed, where eligibility is determined, and where benefits are issued. Next slide. So for the application and kind of certification process, there's two main kind of criteria areas that we'll talk about. So there's financial criteria and then non-financial criteria. Once you are determined eligible, there's benefit issuance, and then to stay on the program if you still need it. There are other responsibilities, such as there may be periodic reporting, there may be work requirements, time limits, and then there is always the recertification process, which is basically reapplying in a sense in a more streamlined way to continue to receive benefits. Next slide. So everyone who lives and works, well, who lives together and purchases and prepares meals together is grouped together in one SNAP household. Some people who live and work I keep saying who live together, such as spouses, children under the age of 22, they're all automatically included in the same SNAP household, even if they purchase meals and prepare meals separately. So maybe you have a child 21 living at home, they're kind of doing their own thing, they would still be considered in the same household. However, if a person is 60 years or older, and they're unable to purchase and prepare meals separately because of a permanent disability, that person and the person's spouse could be considered a separate SNAP household, even if they live with others and they don't have very much income. Next slide. So where and how do people apply? So most people nowadays apply online. Every state has an online application. You can also go to a local office or work with an authorized representative. An authorized representative is someone that this household has said that they can act in their stead. So this is where a lot of outreach groups kind of start helping households, helping families with this process, is helping them with the application. So next slide. So what is required to start the SNAP application? Name, address, and signature. That is the minimum set by law. You can, all you have to do is put your name, your address, and your signature on an application and submit it, and that starts the clock. That starts the application process. More is always helpful. States always want more information. It helps the process go a lot faster, but the minimum is just name, address, and signature. Next slide. So getting more into it, financial requirements. So when we're talking about financial requirements, there are three things. There are resources, there are incomes, and there are deductions. When we're talking about resources, that's how much money the household has on hand. Income, how much money is coming into each person's household each month. And then deductions, they are the costs which a household can deduct from their income, and that is used to help determine your eligibility and then later on your benefits. While SNAP is based on financial eligibility, there are other non-financial eligibility requirements, which we'll touch on shortly. But as kind of an example, for a family of 4, 100% of the federal poverty level for a year is $24,250. 130% is a little over $30,000. There is the expectation that a household will spend about 30% of their own money on groceries, and that is taken into account. So because SNAP households are expected to spend that amount of their own resources on food, an allotment, which is the benefit amount, is kind of calculated by multiplying your household's net monthly income by 0.3 and then subtracting the result from the maximum monthly allotment. Next slide. There are different resource limits for non-elderly or disabled household and then elderly and disabled household. Currently, households can have $2,500 in countable resources or $3,500 in countable resources if at least one member of the household is age 60 or older or is disabled. The amounts are updated annually. However, certain resources are not counted when determining eligibility for SNAP. So these are things like your home and a lot, or resources of people who receive supplemental security income, resources of people who receive temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, and most retirement and pension plans. Next slide. When we're talking income, if you're talking income with a caseworker, you're going to hear gross income, net income. In most cases, a household has to meet both the gross and the net income limits described, or you're not eligible for SNAP and can't receive benefits. Gross income means a household's total non-excluded income before any deductions are made, and then the net income is your gross income minus these deductions. A household with an elderly or disabled person only has to meet the net income limit. If all members of your household are receiving things like TANF or SSI, or in some places general assistance, then a household may be deemed what we call categorically eligible for SNAP, because you've already been determined eligible for another means tested program. Next slide. Deductions are very important when it comes to figuring out someone's eligibility and their benefit amount. There are certain standard deductions that every household will receive. There's a 20% deduction from unearned income. There's a standard deduction based on your household size. And then there are other specific deductions based on your situation. So if you have a dependent, so dependent care can be deducted if you need to work, or there's training or education. Medical expenses for elderly and disabled that are more than $35 and not covered by insurance. So if you have a lot of expenses, those can potentially be deducted. In some states, legally owed child support payments can be deducted. And then there's also a standard shelter deduction for homeless households. And then there's excess shelter cost. The shelter deduction is for shelter costs that are more than half of a household's income after other deductions. So someone may, ask about why their electricity and some of their bills are not being taken into account. Most likely they're being taken into account on whether or not you are eligible for this excess shelter deduction. So the shelter costs include, fuel to heat and cook with, electricity, water, basic fee for one telephone, and things like that. Next slide. And then there are these non-financial requirements. So things like your work requirements, ABOD, that means able-bodied adults without dependents. That is similar. It's one of the forms of work requirements. And then there is a citizenship requirement. Next slide. So while we said earlier, while SNAP is based on financial eligibility, there are certain non-financial factors, one of them being work requirements. So there are these general work requirements, anyone aged 16 to 59 and they're able to work. They are required to work, but they can be excused under certain conditions. Same with ABOD work requirements and the time limit. Age 18 to 49, they're able to work, they don't have dependents. There are exemptions to these work requirements as well. And when we're talking about the time limit, this is always my test, it is you're eligible for benefits for 3 months in a 36-month window. That might be less.
That's
and
right.
I will.
That's right. 36.
Oh, thank God. Okay, thank you. That there may also be exemptions to that as well. Next slide. And then another, non-financial requirement is citizenship. SNAP is for any U.S. citizen and certain lawfully present non-citizens. So there are certain legal immigration requirements. Specific requirements for non-citizens who may be eligible have changed over the years and become more complicated in certain areas, and we could do a whole presentation on that. But the main thing is you have to either be a US citizen or lawfully present non-citizen. And then there are other requirements that we don't have listed here. So if that you may not be eligible for the program, if you've been convicted of a drug felony, or most students are not eligible unless they meet certain work requirements or other exceptions. Next slide. And then the other kind of requirements of the application process is once you've submitted all of this information, there is an interview. An interview is normally done over the phone. You can do it in person, especially during the past few years. They've been strictly on the phone. And then there are items that you do have to provide some type of verification on it. This could be a pay stub to show your income. It could be a receipt for your medical expenses, items like that. Next slide. Benefits, once you're determined eligible, benefits are provided on an EBT card. The total amount of SNAP benefits a household gets each month is what we call an allotment. It's issued every month. Anything that is not used in that month rolls over to the next month. Next slide. You can buy any food for home consumption at any authorized retailer. So this is fruits, vegetables, meat, dairy, bread, snack foods, non-alcoholic beverages, and also seeds and plants that produce food. So if you wanted to start a little garden, that could be something that SNAP benefits can be used on. Next slide. SNAP benefits can be redeemed anywhere that is authorized. And nowadays, this is a mixture of brick and mortar stores, could be a supermarket, a convenience store. Farmers markets can be authorized to accept benefits. Farmers can be authorized to accept benefits, and then they can go to a farmer's market or have their own farm stand. You can also now use your benefits online. This is in 48 states and DC currently. SNAP cannot cover any delivery fee though, it only is for food. And then soon we are hoping to have some mobile payment pilots up and running. Next, thank you. So there are some responsibilities of a household, which is also a great way that organizations can help households out. There's periodic reporting. So each household's assigned a reporting cycle. This could be, once a quarter, it could be every 6 months, it could be once a year. It could be if something changes in your situation. These are to report mainly any changes in income or changes in your household composition. And next slide. Each eligible household is assigned a certification period. These range from 6 months to 12 months to 24 months. It really depends on the state you're in and the household's composition and situation. When that certification period ends, households have to recertify in order to keep receiving benefits. One thing to note, as the pandemic has been going on, as states get backed up on processing applications, recertifications, as long as all of your materials are submitted on time, while there may be a lapse at some point, it's possible, benefits will always go back to the date that, either you applied or your certification period ended. And then these are just a few resources. So on the online purchasing pilot, which is no longer a pilot, to find a SNAP retailer. And then our state directory, which is contact information for all of the states and their websites and how people can apply and find help. And I believe that is everything. So thank you so much for that.
Before you disappear, you did a great job. Thank you. And I'm sure we have plenty of people that have some questions and are just trying to digest all of that information that you shared. Just a quick question before you move on though. Do you know on average from like application through processing, how long it normally takes to, on average, to get someone from application to receiving benefits?
Yes, so by regulation, by law, states have up to 30 days to process an application. Normally, in the before times, I would say it wouldn't take that long. Nowadays, not really sure. However, there is also, you can be eligible for SNAP benefits within 7 days of your application date if you meet certain kind of requirements. So like if your household has less than $100, if your monthly gross income is less than $150. So there are certain requirements that if you meet them, that you could get what we call expedited service. Many states, when they first get an application, they will screen for expedited service right away so that they can meet these timeframes of the 7 days, and that is 7 days of application being submitted, and then being determined eligible.
Great, thank you so much. And if you all have other questions for Jackie, we'll take them at the end. Please do use the question and answer section for me, because I know there's lots of great chatter and sharing of resources in the chat. And so I want to make sure your questions don't get lost. We already have a few in the queue, so looking forward to that. Thanks, Jackie. All right, we're going to turn it over now to Dr. Nipa Kamdar. She's a research science specialist and family nurse practitioner. She's focused on reducing exposure to adverse social determinants in effort to improve individual health and wellness using community-based participatory research methods. Her motivation to pursue this research originates from her experiences as a family nurse practitioner delivering care in low-income, underserved communities for more than a decade. Dr. Kamdar completed in 2021 her VA Health Science Research and Development postdoctoral fellowship from the Center for Innovation in Quality, Safety, and Effectiveness, also known as IQUEST, at the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center in Houston. And we have the privilege to be very great partners with Dr. Kamdar. We're thrilled to have you with us to share some of your research and insights. So over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. I always have to look up what IQUEST stands for on Google Map every time I write it out. So great job in getting it all out there. As Kelly said, I'm Nipa Kamdar. I do research at our VA here in Houston, and I really want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some of my research findings with you today. Next slide, please. Actually, I don't see my slides on there. Okay, we can skip to the next one now. All right, so I think you already know this by now, but food insecurity by definition is just basically a household level economic and social condition of limited or uncertain access to food. I am a believer in pictures saying 1,000 words. And so this photo that you see on your screen is a photo that a veteran took of his refrigerator. A couple of things to note in it is it has some eggs, condiments. You don't see a lot of fresh produce in there, and just in general, you don't see a lot of food in there at all. And this to me epitomizes food insecurity. Next slide, please. I think it's really important to know that there are actually 4 levels of food insecurity. You're either not just food insecure or food secure. We'll start with high food security. That's at the bottom of your triangle. And that's where most of us live. We don't worry about having enough access to food or the types of food that we want to eat. We're not worried about it. The next level above that is marginal food security. And that's where there's some worry or anxiety about having enough food, but not really any changes to the consumption habits or the food purchasing habits. The next level above that is low food security. This is when people start to modify the types of foods that they're buying. They're purchasing foods that are a little bit cheaper, more affordable. Think about pastas, rices, beans, those types of foods. And then the people who live at the very low food security level, those are the folks that are actually skipping their meals, or they are reducing how much they're taking in. When I describe this level to most veterans, they just nod their head and they say, yeah, that's called rationing. So that's an important point of this pyramid that I want to, or this triangle that I want you to keep in mind for a little bit later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So how many US veterans are experiencing food insecurity? Seems like an easy question to ask, but it's actually one that's really hard to answer. There are estimates that range between 2% to 25%. When you look at research studies, and these are studies that are done with the USDA Household Food Security Survey, and they're done under some like pretty standardized ways of collecting the information. 1 in 4 veterans in 3 or 4 different studies have indicated that they are experiencing food insecurity. So that's 25%. When we look at national surveillance data, that's data from any veterans that live across the United States, not just those that are specific to getting care at VHA. You see similar prevalence between the general population and the US general population and the veteran population, and that's about 10 to 12%. And then when we look at the data from the VHA that they get from real life screening, that's actually less than 1%. So if I had to bet my money on where we are with food insecurity, I would say we're more in that 20 to 25% level, just because that's the data that's collected under fairly standardized ways of getting the information. And those are the veterans that are, again, also getting care at VHA. Next slide, please. So a couple of things that I don't want to throw too many numbers at you, so I just kind of broke it down to some important numbers that I want you to be mindful of. Next slide, please. Okay. So the first one is that veterans have nearly 3 times the increased likelihood of experiencing very low food security compared to those that are socioeconomically matched non-veterans. So what that means is I took 2 groups. I have veterans on one group, and I have non-veterans on another group, and I matched them on gender, race, ethnicity, education, and their family income to poverty ratio. And then when I compare the 2 groups, the veteran group was almost 3 times more likely to experience that most severe form of food security, that one at the top of the triangle, which was the very low food secure group. Next slide, please. And then when I then did some other research, veterans who are reporting food security, like, we are increasingly becoming more and more aware that food insecurity is associated with mental health. We know that food insecurity is associated with depression, but we've also found some research to support that it's associated with suicidal ideation as well. So again, in this comparison study, veterans who are food secure compared to veterans who are not food secure, those that are at that low level of food security, they are about twice as likely to report having suicidal ideation. And then when we look at those veterans who are very low food secure, their likelihood of experiencing or reporting suicidal ideation goes up by almost 4 times compared to somebody who's food secure. And this is, one of few studies that have looked at food insecurity and suicidal ideation veterans. We definitely need to do more, but I think these numbers are pretty striking just alone, and certainly indicate that we need to be taking this very seriously. Next slide, please. And this is just for those people who like visuals. This is that same information, just compacted into one visual. Next slide, please. Okay, so I do believe in having numbers and statistics. Those are important, but it's also, as Josh talked about, the human aspect behind food insecurity. It's really important to remember that behind all of these numbers are real people, and they're experiencing real problems. Food insecurity definitely has an emotional toll. And as I wrap up my presentation, I want to share with you how one veteran described how he felt when he was dealing with trying to find some help for his food needs. So I don't want to actually read his quote to you because I don't think I'll be able to do it justice. But when I was speaking with him, what really struck me was his analogy between the ant and feeling small and the weight that he carries. And then just how getting something as basic as food can be a dehumanizing experience when you don't have it. So that's sort of a parting thought that I want to leave you with. Next slide, please. If you want more information about some of those statistics I threw up on the screen there, I've got some publications that you can take a look at. If you are unable to access the full manuscript, you can always email me. Next slide, please. And I will be happy to send you copies of them. And Kelly, that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Nipa. We're so grateful for your research and for sharing this information, as it helps us to frame and reference some of the challenges and the ways that people are feeling for our veteran community. And we, just so everyone's aware, also we have Dr. Kamdar's research linked through the Combined Arms Institute webpage, and as she's shared, that you can also email her directly for the research. So I encourage you all to take a look at that. I'll throw that link in the chat so that you all can find that. You just scroll down, there's a bunch of navigation blocks with tools and resources, as well as some of the other research papers that we've referenced here. If you'll go to the next slide, what we want to do at this point, so now that we've sort of framed the overall conversation, is share a little bit more about organizational work and how they're tackling this challenge on the ground. So I'd like to invite Michael Adamson, who's the manager of Operation Commissary from Operation Stand Down Tennessee, to join us and share a little bit more about the work that he's doing. He's a U.S. Navy veteran, a submariner, and is now managing this program for Operation Commissary, which has been so successful. It's now out of its pilot phase. And we're just so grateful to you, Michael, and to the work that you all are doing in Tennessee to support and really empower this community. So over to you to share a little bit more about this work.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for having me out here. So we are in Tennessee. Essentially, Operation Stand Down has existed since 1993 to provide support to veterans in Middle Tennessee, trying to create an all-encompassing blanket that supports, lifts them back up, and gives them a hand up, not a handout. So assessing the climate and the need for resources, we came to Operation Commissary based on an idea or a realization that veterans are substantially less likely to seek services. So Operation Commissary provides a discrete delivered package that doesn't look like a food bag or anything of that nature, taking away some of the stigmas or the insecurities faced by individuals who, through their entire military career, regardless of how long it was, have been told and trained that they should be self-sufficient, self-serving, and more than capable of dealing with whatever their issue is. So we deliver these bags to them in person. It's non-perishable foods, and we provide gift cards that allow the individuals to go out and buy the perishables, whether it's bread, milk, produce, whatever it is that they need to supplement the non-perishable food items that we are able to deliver. Many of our clients are the types that are living remotely, living independently, and have found themselves otherwise isolated from the rest of the world. So this interaction with our delivery driver or with the Project Dash people, who we'll talk about in a minute, it often prevents that complete isolation. It also gives us the opportunity to keep eyes on the veterans in the Middle Tennessee area who are otherwise going to slip through the cracks and not get the services they need. So we're able to identify veterans through Operation Commissary that may need other services. For example, we had a 95-year-old World War II veteran who, it was identified during conversations with him, he could no longer get into his bathtub. So we sent up the signal, got a contractor to come in. He did all of the work free of charge. We had donors come in and pay for all the supplies. It's just a great coming together of the community to take care of this World War II veteran who otherwise would have probably gone years without getting a shower before anything got done about it. We are primarily philanthropically funded. However, we have just received some amount of funding through the Sergeant Fox grant tied to suicide prevention. And as the other panelists have mentioned, there is a direct correlation between food insecurity and mental health and suicide. So tying those two together, we've been able to secure some additional funding that will help us with buying food. Next slide, please. So we have three different distribution models. One is in person at one of our three distribution or service centers. We have our main service center here in Nashville. There's one up in Montgomery County that is very near to Fort Campbell. And then we are opening a Murray County service center that is going to allow us to start expanding services into the lower counties like Lawrence County, Giles. For those of you not familiar with Tennessee, Nashville falls in Davidson County. So if you're looking at this map, or as you're looking at it, these are all the counties that we have available to provide service to. Aside from that, we do home deliveries. Like I said, that is the bulk of our clientele. Home deliveries done by either Project Dash or Operation Stand Down Tennessee, which Project Dash is a nonprofit support through DoorDash that allows the delivery of commodities within a 10-mile radius. So they've supported us by reducing the cost that we have to spend on gas, vehicle maintenance, all of those, I guess, otherwise detractors from us accomplishing our full mission by being able to buy more food and support more families. We also have remote, We also have remote pickup locations, American Legions, universities in the Middle Tennessee area that have a high population of veterans in need. That we drop off between 20 and 40 bags, and then those sites distribute all the information and provide us with all the client details so that we can continue with our identifying of where issues lie. Next slide, please. This is just a quick overview of how we enroll people. There are 3 options. They're either a phone client, somebody who calls in, they don't have access to the internet, they don't know how to use the internet, or they just prefer to continue to operate through traditional means of phone communication or direct communication. Otherwise, we let people sign up through online. We have a jot form that's set up. They need to submit some of the documents that we would request. As it stands right now, the only real requirement to get into this program is that you have a DD-214. You present us with a DD-214 or NGB-22, we will get you enrolled into the program until we're able to get more of that substantiating evidence and maybe get you pushed on to a program that's going to be able to provide the additional support that you actually need beyond the food insecurity support. Existing clients is the third way to get in. Like I said, we have other programs inside Operation Stand Down Tennessee that we utilize as a conduit to get people into our Operation Commissary program. Then the deliveries are based on regional location unless there is an emergent need, at which point we go straight out and get them delivered within a week. Next slide. No, I'll go back to this one. All right, so I mentioned our partnerships. Right now, all of our food is coming through Second Harvest, which is really kind of our guide on whether or not we are providing nutritional food to the community. They have a tracking system for everything that I order and bring into our warehouse before it goes out. Gives us an indication as to whether or not we're providing healthy food. I'm happy to say that we are 75% healthy food with a very small amount of non-healthy food, and then just a little sliver of moderately healthy food. Project Dash I already touched on, but it has been a huge support getting us to our distribution level. And our partners, we've got American Legion Post down in Fayetteville, Tennessee, American Legion Post in Smith County. Belmont University is distributing to us, which was one of the surprising demographics or groups that we came across. Many college students are making this decision to go in and use their post 9/11 GI Bill, or our veteran students are going in to use the post 9/11 GI Bill, but they don't get their financial support until classes start. So providing this month food delivery gives them the opportunity to not have to make the hard decision between waiting until school starts or going out, canceling their plans of going to school and just getting a full-time job so they can support themselves or their families in some cases. Further, we work with any VFW, American Legion, or VSO in the Middle Tennessee region. And as they continue to come to us with an increased demand, we continue to try and do everything we can to support. Then on our last page, next slide, sorry. Just some of the demographics over our first year of operation. I think I might have skipped over it, but we just started this last November. Really, the service and the delivery process didn't start until January, after we got all of our initial startup kinks worked out. January, we had 72 individuals enrolled in the program. At this point, we are at 460. Over the entire time, we've had 502 people enrolled, but we have had individuals or families either move into a position where they no longer need the services, or they have enrolled in other services that are providing them more support, and they've opted to give us the resources they would receive back so we can help a new family or an additional family with what we're doing. 2,600 bags have been delivered, 746 bags delivered to our remote sites. And 23% of individuals who have come to Operation Commissary as their first connection with Operation Stand Down have subsequently enrolled in other programs. Those programs being our Grant Per Diem program. We have a shallow subsidies program for individuals who are just above the federal poverty line. We have a supportive services program that covers rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. So through this program of Operation Commissary, we've created a demand signal where we are able to identify additional resources that families of veterans or veterans themselves are going to be able to utilize so they can get their lives on track or just kind of get back to a normal state of operation. That is all the information that I have. Don't want to take up too much time, but again, thank you all for what you're doing and for getting us involved in this.
Thank you so much, Michael. We're grateful for you sharing a little bit about the work that you all are doing in Tennessee. And I love the innovation inside of the dignified delivery and the way that you're using that as first contact to offer more wraparound services, as well as the partnership with Project Dash, which I think is a really great opportunity for other organizations and communities to think about how do they leverage some of those ideas. So thank you so much for sharing. Next up, I want to bring in John Smith, is Combined Arms Southeast, John, Regional Manager for Combined Arms, which powers the Texas Veterans Network. To date, we've served and connected 30,000 veterans and military families to services across the state of Texas. And John is a great leader in the greater Houston region and beyond. That's helping to address our 442% increase of requests for food security and for food services. So John, if you would, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit more about the work we're doing on the ground.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. As Kelly said, and as you see on the screen, the name is John Smith. Sounds fake, but it is real. And, as Combined Arms and the Texas Veteran Network, what we are is that network of organizations to get that veteran connected. So we essentially don't supply any direct services. However, we're able to keep track and keep an eye on what is kind of the emergent need. And of course, we kept seeing food insecurity coming up as being a requested resource under financial assistance. And so I teamed up with Dr. Kamdar, and we looked at some of the demographics of the areas, starting with Galveston County. You saw the little video down there. And of course, I have some metrics up here on the screen. Don't want to bore everybody with some metrics, but metrics are awesome. And so when we reached out, we identified that, it was needed in that area. And as time progressed, we had meetings with a Joint Reserve Base here in our area, identifying tons of service members that needed that assistance as well. And then, of course, other areas right outside of Houston. Now, Houston is very big. A lot of you are very aware of that. And what you may not know is there's about 160,000 veterans that reside in this area. And as Dr. Kamdar just said, 1 in 4 of those are food insecure. So that's meaning about 40,000. And like what Michael just said, veterans aren't ones that are going to go out and say, hey, I need help with food. I can tell you firsthand with starting the one in Galveston County. Galveston County hosts 2,500 mobile food pantries. And we had asked them to start identifying some of the veterans, and some of them were identifying themselves. But then we launched the veteran-specific mobile food pantry, and the veterans just came out of the woodworks because they appreciated it more that it was veteran specific for them and for their community. And again, they had that mindset, oh, if I go to this other food pantry, I'm going to take away from somebody else that's in need. It is crazy, even as a veteran myself, that sense of service doesn't go away. And even when in that time of need, veterans are still thinking of others. So we have to kind of fine tune it to be able to draw those veterans in. Something else that I really want to touch on is that it's a community effort. There is no way possible that I would be able to do this by myself. As you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, there are a ton of different organizations that I partner up with. Honestly, just because the need is there. It takes a community to build a community. But while we're out there, these veterans are also identifying other resources that they need and kind of some of the resources that we want them to have. Of course, some veterans are on a fixed income. So, of course, we're not going to be able to supply them with some career opportunities, but we can supply them with some financial education for them to, work on their budget, try to figure out a better means for their budget. Some of them, they just need a better job, so we get them connected with career placement opportunities. Some of them are claims. They just need an uptick in their claims. They're not sure how the system works. We work with organizations to get them connected. And then on top of that, like I said, that sense of service, sometimes I get a lot of veterans that are like, hey, I know I'm here to get food, but can I help distribute the food as well? So being able to offer volunteers opportunities for them is beyond remarkable. And it's been hands down incredible, the amount of appreciation that the veterans have for it. But if anything, if I can say anything, just work with your community partners. It is so hard to do such a critical mission, like attacking the food disparity, to do it as a singular entity. Houston Food Bank, they're one of the largest in the US. They can't do it by themselves. And so we team up with them. Team Rubicon is helping with volunteers getting the food distributed. We have different organizations that will pick up the food because we have homeless communities, and there's no way that they're going to be able to drive to our area. So we have volunteers that will go and deliver that food to those folks. And so again, I always say it takes a community to build a community. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly because I want to leave enough time for questions and answers. I know we covered a lot of great information, and I just want to give everybody the opportunity to kind of ask any questions that they have. But before I do depart, I want to leave that quote on the screen that you just saw. We recently just did a mobile food pantry at the Joint Reserve Base here. And just for context, with my initial one in Galveston County, I had about 54 families registered. That was the initial one. Now it's surpassed that tremendously. But my initial one on the base for active duty was 180 something families. 180, that was just totally blew my mind of how massive the need is, not only within the veteran community, but even our active duty and reserve service members. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kelly and hopefully answer some questions for you.
Thank you so much, John. We really appreciate it. If you'll just flip to the next slide for everyone, and if there are questions that you all are brewing on, I know there's been a few mentioned in the chat and the question and answer section. I'm just going to highlight this all for you. At the end of this webinar, you are going to receive just a pop-up of a survey. We'd be grateful for your insight and feedback, or if you want to pull out your phone, this QR code will link you right there as well, and we'll also send it in a follow-up email. This is really important for us as we think about potentially follow-on education opportunities, as well as just overall feedback. And I am going to call out this one for providers. It doesn't sound that exciting, but financial management for nonprofits, we've got some great researchers that want to share some information with you about how to be more effective in your financial setup as organizational providers. And so share that with your executive leadership teams, your chief operating officers, your financial directors. This one is one that's not to be missed. So if you want to take the slide deck down, and I'm happy to invite our panelists up to join us while we're getting situated here. I'm just so grateful to each and every one of you for sharing your insight and for your expertise in trying to help us think through this challenge. But as Josh shared earlier, it is a preventable crisis, and everyone's doing their part to help join us in solving towards this. So, and we got to zoom in on Michael. Oh, that's exciting. So some great stuff. So one of the things I do want to just kick off with, as I know there's a couple of questions that we'll pull out here in a second, but one of the things that's been stewing on my mind, Josh, could you share a little bit more about the what's going on with the NDAA and the work that you've done both historically and going forward around the basic needs and allowance? Do you have more information for that?
Sure, thanks. And I saw there was a question that came up in the chat relating to the issue about active duty families. And let's just pause for a second and reflect on how ridiculous and outrageous it is that we even have to talk about active duty military families and food insecurity in the same sentence. That should never be the case. Unfortunately, it's been a longstanding issue that has been swept under the rug for many, many years. One of the big challenges for active duty households has to do with the treatment of the basic allowance for housing. So that's the benefit that is conveyed to those who live off base or in privatized military housing. The BAH should not be treated as income for SNAP purposes. It's not treated as income for federal income tax purposes, and it's not treated as income for most federal programs. but it is for SNAP only because Congress hasn't taken explicit action to add it as an excludable source of income. So there are a couple things that are happening to try and address military food insecurity. There's a marker bill right now, a bipartisan bill that Senators Tammy Duckworth and Lisa Murkowski have introduced that basically would just exclude that BAH as counted income for SNAP. Next week, we're expecting a House counterpart bill. Jimmy Panetta from California and Kathy McMorris Rogers from Washington will be introducing a bipartisan bill. The hope is that would get incorporated into the Farm Bill, and don't want to get too far in the weeds, but SNAP gets authorized about every 5 years in the Farm Bill, and that's due next year for reauthorization. So in addition to that, there's an effort in the National Defense Authorization Act to make some improvements to a new program that MAZON helped to craft together with partners at National Military Family Association and Military Officers Association of America, creating a military family basic needs allowance. We need to get some problems fixed with that, so that for that program too, it'll exclude the basic allowance for housing, and ideally it'll have a higher income threshold. So there are efforts underway in NDAA right now, and if folks are interested in getting involved with that or more information, I'm happy to help offline.
Thank you so much, Josh. We really appreciate it. Jackie, you shared so much great information earlier about just the high level information on SNAP benefits. And I think the key here, the key takeaway for me, of course, is just that when we look at what's happening tactically on the ground as providers, right, the information and the qualifiers are really vary state by state. And I know that's something that we've had a challenge with some of that and just navigating some of that information. What in terms, if I'm answering the phone talking to a veteran that's food insecure or needs some resources, where do you recommend is my first step as a resource to look for, just to figure out how to help start to begin that process or help to determine that qualifier?
Yes, so I would say that the first step, the easiest place I always find to look is, not to tout our own website, but on the FNS, on the SNAP website, it does have information on what those eligibility requirements are, what the income limits are. It tries to explain how to kind of figure out if you're eligible at all. But more importantly, it also provides that, direct website and sometimes even a phone number to the state or a local office that someone can call and start the process on having someone apply for the program, which is always can be the hardest first step to just actually start the process.
Great, thanks, Jackie. And then John, from a tactical level, how have you navigated this for individuals in terms of the mobile food pantries for getting connected to these benefits?
Yeah, so when we go through, so I don't know if anybody has ever done a mobile food pantry before, but typically it's a handwritten registration page. Luckily, we're in the 21st century, so I've digitized it and we have iPads out there. And during that time, I'm able to ask specifically if there's any additional resources that they do need. One of the first things that I absolutely ask is if they're already enrolled in the VA. If they're not, I highly encourage that they roll in the VA. If there is an emergent need for any type of rental assistance, they're getting directly sent to my intake team. That way, it's a team of social workers. They're going to reach out and do a full assessment and kind of prioritize those referrals that are being made for them. And then it really depends on the other ones. I like to make the direct referrals to our member organizations, so that way that veteran can start that progression of really going back to what Josh said, is not relying on the food bank. The sole purpose of us even having these mobile food distributions is just a temporary hand up. This isn't something that, Combined Arms and the Texas Veterans Network wants to have to continuously maintain. And this is the sole reason I'm getting them connected to those additional resources, because we have data that shows, the more connections that a veteran is making to a resource and is getting the help that they need, that their mental health increases, everything, just their overall well-being increases. And so, of course, we want them to get as many touch point services that they need so they can excel, so they can be a thriving member in society, but not only for them, but for their spouses as well. Again, I go back onto, I know a lot of folks are dealing with, the older veterans that are on a fixed income. I highly encourage the financial education. The budgeting is something that a lot of folks forget about. But now with the rising cost of everything, returning to your budget and really focusing on what that looks like, maybe it just takes a gentle hand from one of our organizations that offer that. I mean, there's so many organizations out there that do offer the financial education piece, and it's simple as that could help. Yeah, I think I answered that question.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and I know, Michael, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on to that, but as you're doing the delivery or distribution services, just connecting people into more services at Operation Stand Down, where yeah, go ahead and add in.
No, I was just going to say one of the biggest issues we run into, especially given the low income situation we find among most of these individuals, is that staying in contact and maintaining or like guaranteed addresses has been a substantial issue. So the more avenues you have of communication for them to reach you, the better off you're going to end up being. Just because you don't know from one day to the next if you'll be able to get them via email, or if you're going to be making a phone call, or if they're just going to be popping through the door and saying, hey, I don't have anything left.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Great point. Dr. Kamdar, I know there was a question in the chat, but I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit more about the correlation between food insecurity and homelessness. I know we've seen a lot from our data at Combined Arms about the interconnectivity of issues. Of course, that's why it's been a major concern of ours is, where people are asking for financial assistance and food assistance, but we know those have, interlocking challenges. And so could you share a little bit more about your research on that?
Yeah, I haven't actually directly researched food insecurity and homelessness myself, but they are definitely very highly correlated. And all you have to do is a quick Google search and you'll see that the correlation is just, I don't want to say 1-to-1, but it's like 80% or something like that, very high. And the way that I kind of look at food insecurity is that's a symptom of a broader illness. So if we look at like the illness being poverty or something like that, housing instability or homelessness kind of sit in that same spectrum. Both of them are financial issues, and so of course it makes sense that they're correlated. I would be interested to know like how people are making decisions. Like, does rent come above food, or does food come above rent? And I guess that's something that I don't know enough about to answer. It's a question that I have on my own. But as John once said, nobody's ever just food insecure. That's not your only one problem. So that's kind of all I can really tell you about that. They live together, those two problems.
Thank you. Yeah, I will share actually just as in that point that the Military Family Advisory Network did some research about the causal factors for veteran and military family food insecurity that correlates that. And there are some, of course, many anecdotal stories to talk about it. You do have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay your rent. You do have to get to work or to those jobs that are paying the bills, but oftentimes, especially parents with young children are the ones most at risk for food insecurity because they're most likely to try to scrimp and save wherever they possibly can. And so there is research out there that's also linked on the Combined Arms Institute page. Josh, do you have more you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to add, I think about it in terms of basic needs and security, right? So food insecurity is not in isolation, as we've all acknowledged. And sometimes different life circumstances require different decisions to be made. So if you have an emergency medical bill, you might need to pay that, and that it comes at the expense of paying for gas or paying for utilities or putting food on the table. And so when you have limited resources, you're having to make adjustments there. And nobody should have to make those kind of trade-offs for basic necessities. And unfortunately, far too many veterans right now are struggling with that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. I know this is, and I don't know if this is an answerable question for you, Jackie, but I am gonna ask you this. So it's something that we're all looking at holistically, but there's a great question about just SNAP qualifications, different costs of living in different cities, you know, specifically New York. I know, for example, we obviously have a lot of service members in the greater DC area that impacts a lot of people, just the cost of living and housing allowance. So how is that, are there things that are being worked on to be more inclusive for all of the people that might need these benefits?
That is a really hard question to answer. So I will try my best. I would say that when it comes to kind of, you know, comparing a place like New York City and DC with a place like, I'm from a small town in North Carolina, like obviously the cost of living is very different. We try as much as we can to you know, build in ways that states, you know, have options to try to kind of make it a little bit more realistic for households in the different areas. There are just unfortunately, based on federal law, certain things that, you know, have to be in place. There are the income limits. There are certain things that we kind of can't waive, but there are ways such as the excess shelter deduction. Many states have the options for what we call standard utility allowances. So say in the Northeast, blizzards, heating costs are probably a lot more than what they are in the South. States have the options to set those type of allowances to where then when you're calculating someone's eligibility and then their benefit amount, that will hopefully help kind of offset some of that balance based on more of like the national overview and what those national standards are versus state by state. Go ahead.
And also for SNAP, there are flexibilities that some states have taken advantage of to increase the gross income limit. So for SNAP, the kind of bare minimum is 130% of the federal poverty guidelines. But because of broad-based categorical eligibility, some states have increased that up to 150%, 185%, and even up to 200%. So that enables more people to be able to qualify and potentially a somewhat more generous benefit.
Yep, and states have all of these options and they can take them. It's a case by case, it's a state by state case on whether or not they do. And we try to work with them as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. And Josh, I know your expertise is invaluable here to all of us as providers. And I know there's some great conversation about partnerships and collaboration and how do you reach out. I mean, the summary of this is a preventable crisis. There are many resources available, but it's up to each one of us to try to dig in a little bit more and find the partnerships and create those opportunities that might be able to really connect those to services. And I think it's one of the most important things that we think about in terms of the stigma, specifically for our veteran and community. We want to make sure that we're removing that stigma, and each one of us as providers has the obligation to do that and figure out how to offer more holistic support to individuals so that we can get them access, right? We have access to federal benefits like unemployment, and this is the same benefit that people might be eligible for in terms of registering for SNAP. But we are also, as community providers, and each and every one of you on the ground delivering services every day, have the opportunity to create partnerships that offer some of those financial assistance support, food assistance support. And, like we've been talking about, we've had amazing support from the Woodruff Foundation, the Got Your Six Network. They're supporting partners across the nation to provide just a little bit extra and do what we can to meet the needs of this community. And so we're grateful to all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing their expertise, and for just sharing a little bit more about the work that they're doing on the ground, and for each and every one of you for taking an action during Hunger Action Month. We're grateful for you spending the time with us today. We hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. So thanks, everybody.